Production funding for this program was made possible in part by a grant from the Alabama State Council on the Arts.
Animal, vegetable, or mineral?
Animal, vegetable, or mineral?
Animal, vegetable,
Animal,
mineral.
vegetable,
Animal,
mineral,
vegetable, animal, mineral, vegetable, mineral.
animal, vegetable, mineral.
I was born in 1940 in Bear Creek, Alabama, which is about 100 miles north of here. And I was the fourth down out of 6 kids. We were raised poor, but very proud, and we were farmers. My parents felt Roosevelt saved the country. I was named after Roosevelt. I was named Frank Noah. I used to trace pictures, and that was the only art, because on the farm there are chores, what to do every day. So there was not a lot of free time. My early life was a sheer joy, really, because it was rural and very pretty, and probably instilled in me most of the work ethic, I have now, and my closeness with nature. As a kid, I had a speech problem, and it was rather severe. It was sometimes so painful to try to verbalize. I guess what I felt, what I had to say, was not worth the effort trying to say it, so, and I could verbalize, I could talk to the animals. When I was a senior in high school, our agriculture teacher came to my parents and told them where I could get help. And that was up at Florence State College, which is about 35 miles north of where we live. So I went there so I could take speech therapy. I was going to major in biology. And I think my freshman year, I took an art course and found out I could draw and paint and stuff like that.
He could communicate through his art, not only to me, but to the entire class and all the students that were in the art department at that time. They'd say, well, why didn't we think of the things that Frankie thought of? But it was because of his originality and his ability to express himself through his art, I think, that made him outstanding. Even that very first semester he was at UNA.
On the Fleming side, no male had ever been to college, so the speech problem was really a blessing in a disguise, because that was the real reason why I went to college.
He said that when he got to UNA, he felt like he'd made a big step And he said he also felt like a fledgling.
When Frank graduated from the University of North Alabama, Florence State College, he found a job for about 7 years where he worked at the Space Center. And I remember he called it a very dulling time for him. He was a technical artist, and it gave him an opportunity, though, to develop a lot of technical skill, and I guess it also showed him that maybe he had done all he ever wanted to do with two-dimension. And so in the early 70s, he went to the University of Alabama for a Master's of Fine Arts and focused on ceramics.
At the university, they were so absorbed in abstract expressionism and pots and keeping everything brown, and you know. So my first pieces there were these huge pots that were hand built, you know, with slabs and coils, kind of like abstract forms, but still had a vessel approach.
At that point, the university was primarily focused on teaching ceramics as things that were functional, not sculptural. He really was encouraged to look at earth tones, but pottery and ceramics in general were really changing dramatically really from the late 50s onward.
In 1972, I made a trip with a couple of friends to San Francisco. And there I saw people, you know, working with all these colored clays and these strange things, you know, like Robert Arnson and Peter Vokas and David Gilhooly and Marilyn Levine, and they were anything but pots, you know. They were mainly sculptural, funky stuff, and this, you know, opened up my vision of ceramics, and probably was the most educational thing I have ever experienced. So I came back and started doing these little pieces using colors and lusters and all this stuff, but I was not encouraged by the faculty. And so for my graduate thesis, I made a huge pile of brown rocks.
In 1973, when Frank finished his degree at the university, he moved to Birmingham. He had found support through some sales of some objects and felt encouraged. And then just a year later, he'd set up a studio here. Just a year later, in 1974, he was offered a one-man show at the Birmingham Museum of Art.
Up until that time, it was the biggest turnout for an opening they had at the museum. Of course, they served beer and ice cream, so that always brings people out, no matter what they're looking at.
At that point, he wasn't using porcelain. This was a red clay that was covered with a white glaze. And it wasn't long after that, about 1975 or so, that Frank began using a porcelain clay that he had discovered in Tennessee. And in exploring its properties more and learning how to work with it, he decided to stop glazing his figures. And I think that that was really when he did find his voice and his best way of expression.
It is the absence of color that attracts me, you know, where you can delve into pure form. The glaze, you know, to me acted as a barrier between you and the piece of work.
An unglazed figure really does allow the texture and the detail to come through in a way that it just can't, sort of hidden under that layer of glaze. And when you look at Frank's work, there's incredible detail of the animals. You see beaks and veins and claws, and in particular bird feathers. When he makes one of his birds, he impresses each of the feathers with a real feather. So the detail of those is exact and beautiful.
Animal.
Animal.
Vegetable. Animal.
Vegetable.
Vegetable.
Animal. Mineral.
Mineral.
Vegetable. Animal.
Mineral.
Vegetable. Mineral.
Well, I first came to know Frank Fleming's work when I came to Washington, D.C. to join the Smithsonian Institution at their Renwick Gallery. And that was in 1974. And there was a marvelous exhibition of Frank's at a private gallery in Washington, D.C., a commercial gallery. And of course, in the art world, we're always looking for artists that are doing something new. And I think Frank's work certainly fit into that category. At the same time, these pieces were delightful, humorous. They were serious and kind of mystical. That he chose not to paint the work, I thought was very significant. I think if he had added color to the pieces, I think it would have taken the work in a different direction. It might have made it perhaps too cute or too funny.
He's a very individualistic artist, I would say, and not particularly fitting into any trend, but I see him having the influence of surrealism, a dog with wings or a rabbit with a human body. Basically, it's the juxtaposition of unusual elements, unexpected, and very often having the characteristic of dreams.
Frank says that the three artists who have had the most impact on him are Hieronymus Bosch, Rene Magritte, and Robert Arneson. And Magritte, among those, is especially known as a surrealist. And I think in Magritte's paintings, we see someone who is constantly examining reality. And I think that's what Frank is asking us to do often. The apple has legs, or the animal takes on human forms, but it's so real, and then it's not. And it's deceptive, you know, it's this deception that pulls us up and makes us think in a way we hadn't thought about, either that object or a concept that we hadn't before.
Surrealism, for some reason, it's more prevalent in European art. And I think it takes an artist who has is somewhat withdrawn, living a very inward existence that responds to this kind of imaginative expression.
If I have any imagination, I think it was from growing up, not communicating, not talking a lot. You know, maybe that instilled something in me that could not have been taught or learned. It was, I guess, for self-survival, that's when the soul becomes the strongest, I guess. And so that's, you know, pretty much what some of those years were. Usually, I don't sketch, because if I do, well, the sketch is the idea done, you know, and then doing it in clay is just copying something that's already done.
I know in the eyes of most Europeans that Americans are thought to be very literal-minded and very literal in their expression. I mean, Andy Warhol's painting a Campbell's soup can, what could be more literal, more matter-of-fact than that? Well, Frank Fleming's work is just the opposite of that to me. It's an imaginative creation from another world.
I will do an animal, and what turns out is sometimes more surprising than I had in mind, because it takes on its own being. It seems to have a soul, and with that, I'm probably saying that sometimes we forget how much of a role nature plays.
Many of them are uncomfortable to look at, and that is part of what draws us into the power of what these pieces are, because these pieces speak to us about our own foibles and about our own shortcomings and about our own kind of unpleasant relation with the world that we are continuing to damage, to destroy. So is it not correct then that these animals look back at us in a slightly pained way?
Frank began a series in the 1980s based on Picasso's great anti-war painting, Guernica, which came from the bombing in 1937 of a Spanish town.
What I was trying to convey was how war affects, animals and nature and the environment. And this was back in the 80s. This was during, Uncle Ronnie's buildup of missiles. And, one day, it got to me. I was supposed to have a show in New York in December of 82 or 83. And I sent slides of all this, and the guy was just horrified. He said, "No, I can't show that stuff. It's so sad, and people want to come to New York at Christmas and be happy."
Frank's work has been collected by museums and private collections and really corporate collections since the late 70s, from the Renwick Gallery with the Smithsonian and the National Museum of American Art, the American Craft Museum. There came a point in the early 80s where he really didn't have time for any more shows or any more commissions, and he was getting very, very busy.
I came here at a real good time, when the clay movement from California really got started. And I was always serious about what I was doing. In 1 month, I had to sell all my possessions to pay the rent, but I stood my course and did not take a part-time job. And I strictly stuck to what I was doing. I didn't take off weekends, and I didn't take off holidays. I worked every day. This is probably the 12,987th calla lily I've made. But it beats picking cotton.
Did you do that growing up?
Yeah. Yeah. See, we farmed about 30 acres and did it all with mules and horses. And we plowed from the time, we could reach other plow handles. But I think that's where I became semi-ambidextrous, because you pick cotton, with both hands. That and milking cows.
I think that to have an artist that is very closely identified to his region in such a positive way is quite refreshing and makes it much more interesting for me than artists who are so worldly and connected that they are picking up on each other's ideas oftentimes. So sometimes the isolation that an artist has is part and parcel of what their originality is about.
No career, nothing has mattered enough to take me away from home. Not being a rocket scientist or whatever, I don't need a lot of outside stimulus to keep me happy. I can walk out the door and see a tree or a flower or a bird. My first love is my yard and my garden, my vegetable garden. That's my first love. But I have to work.
Frank started working in bronze in the early 80s, and I think the bronze castings have been very sensitive and very exact and very true to his porcelain models.
You pack up a show of clay to ship off. It's a nightmare. Bronze became so much more feasible and had a sense of permanence about it.
Frank's work started out with porcelain, and it took him several years to really master the technical difficulties of that medium. And of course, one of the technical difficulties is the fact that you cannot work on a large scale in porcelain. And so his working in bronze has really afforded him that opportunity, as well as an opportunity to move into public art projects where you can get a different kind of exposure than you would through private collections or museum collections.
Frank was commissioned to do a fountain in 5 Points around 87 or 88. It was Frank's first large outdoor commission or public commission, and it was part of a large revitalization project that the city of Birmingham was engaged in.
It was my idea to do a piece related to the peaceable kingdom, because old paintings of the peaceable kingdom have always interested me. The storytelling theme is mainly from the ram man holding a book with these other animals listening.
You never can predict what people will find controversial. If anyone had told me that a group of animals gathered in a circle listening to a story being read to them with Frank's theme of the peaceable kingdom, figures based on Uncle Remus and Southern folk tales, if anyone had said to me that someone would find Satan lurking in these animals, I would have said, "You're crazy." But some people felt the figure, which Frank sculpted as a ram, and which also can be seen as a Christ figure if you want to do the opposite ends of this argument, people saw it as satanic, and there were threats that people were going to come and pull it down.
I was shocked, you know. I was scared, but certainly a lot more people became aware of it, saw this piece of work than would have ever had this not have happened.
It was pretty silly, and it eventually died down, and I think people now have embraced it and love it, and it's a huge gathering point.
My mama always said, don't get above your raising. You know, and it sounds simple and trite, but it's you, where you came from, help make you what you are. And if you forget that, then, you know, I just don't see any direction. Mama was real supportive. She never probably understood all of it, but she was overwhelmed by my success and making a living by doing something that was so foreign to anything that's ever happened in my family.
Frank, your flowers are pretty over there. Did you grow all of them?
My family's very important, you know, to me. It's something you know, something you trust, something that is a part of you. It's easy. It's, you know, it's a part of you. It's just that simple. Just that simple. And two, it's a kind of little continuation of that idyllic young growing up on a farm that, you know, still a little bit of it hangs on as long as you've got some of your family that experienced, you know, this with you. You know, it's almost real, like, and wonderful when you can say, "Do you remember?" And they do.
I think that in Frank's work right now, we don't see that biting edge, that satirical edge, or from the 80s, a painfulness. And what Frank has said to me, he's really at peace with himself.
I have never considered myself any more than a Bush League boy, and I'm happy with that. I have never worked to gain fame and like fortune, because my ego isn't that big. And I went to New York, I went to Los Angeles, and it wasn't as much fun as they said it was, you know? You know, and it's just, you know, why the bother? I don't need it. You know, I have had a very good life.
If you consider that man has been closely intertwined with the animal image throughout all of our history, through religious studies, through art history, through philosophy, even astronomy. The stars are often in the shapes of animals. And so Frank has really extended and continued on in those traditions. He's dealing with the universal theme, and he's handling it in a very, very strong way. And so I feel that his work will continue to be enjoyed for generations to come.
What do I think animals know that we don't know? Survival and harmony.
Production funding for this program was made possible in part by a grant from the Alabama State Council on the Arts.
Videotape copies of this program may be purchased by calling 1-800-463-8825. Learn more about this and other programs from the Alabama Experience on the World Wide Web at www.alabamatv.org.